I'd like to welcome you to today's NBAA Thought Leadership webinar, Maximizing Aircraft Availability with Data-Driven Maintenance. We would like to take a moment to thank our webinar sponsor, Veryon. And with that, I'll introduce our moderator for today's discussion, John Talmadge, Vice President of Business Development at Veryon. Over to you, John.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. We have an exciting lineup of industry experts who are going to share their insights and expertise on the latest advancements in data-driven maintenance strategies and how they can revolutionize how you approach aircraft maintenance. We're maximizing for safety and efficiency in your operations. So before we begin our discussion, let's meet our panelists. Together, they have over 70 years of aviation experience combined. And so we'll start with Brad Ungna. So Brad, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your operation.
Yeah, I'm Brad Ungna. I'm Senior Manager of Maintenance at Stryker Corporation. So we're a Part 91 operation. Operate 3 aircraft, 80% domestic, about 20% international. So yeah, it's our Stryker's corporate flight department.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brad. Next, we have Jeff Yoder from Elite Jets. Jeff?
Yeah, it's Jeff Yoder from Elite Jets, the Director of Maintenance of a 135 operation. We operate Phenom 300s and a Legacy 500, both domestically and internationally. We also operate a Bell 407 helicopters.
Mixed fleet, good deal. And then Tim Cox. Good afternoon, Tim. Tell us a little bit about your operation.
Hello, all. I've been in with Lowe's about a year now. We've got a pretty good mixed fleet with Gulfstream and Falcon aircraft, and it's been exciting as a corporate flight department here. We've got about 50 years total with this organization. I've been with them about a year now, so just getting started. I've had 25 years within corporate aviation and 30 plus years in aviation as a whole. So glad to be here. Thanks for letting me be on the panel, and I'm excited to learn today.
You bet. Fantastic. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for all being here today. And to kick things off, we're going to talk about principles and benefits of using real-time data and reporting to help decide how maintenance should occur. But first, we are going to do a quick poll to gauge the audience familiarity with data-driven maintenance. All right, so interesting. Looks like most of us answered somewhat familiar, which makes sense and is sort of in the wheelhouse here. But we do have some that are not familiar at all, so this is a great learning opportunity for him. So let's do a quick overview of what data-driven maintenance entails and how it differs from traditional maintenance. All right, so the data-driven approach facilitates efficient maintenance planning, ensuring aircraft spend more time in the air and less in the hangars, obviously. Accurate and timely data leads to better informed decisions about when and how maintenance should occur, which maximizes that availability we talked about. So in today's aviation landscape, data has become an indispensable asset. We really use it throughout the entire operation. It provides us with real-time insights that we never had access to before. So let's talk to our panelists about some of the specific benefits they've observed in implementing data-driven maintenance strategies for their business aircraft, and also a helicopter we've got thrown in there as well. And we're also going to launch another poll to sort of see what you think first. So interesting, those responses were sort of more spread across the spectrum. So everything from reducing the unplanned maintenance and enhancing the decision-making process. So all of that is extremely insightful. Aviation maintenance software that uses real-time data and automated workflows can help schedule the maintenance to maximize aircraft availability. So we're going to ask our panelists here, and we'll start with Brad for this one. Here's your question. Could you provide examples of what kind of features you look for in maintenance tracking software that helps perform data-driven maintenance?
Yeah, definitely easy use. It's got to be easy to use across all platforms, or whether you're talking about laptop, iPad, iPhone, anything like that. When we're talking data-driven, for me, it's important that it's customizable. So if we notice a data pattern in our fleet or whatever, that we can actually input that into the system that we're using, and we can start tracking it individually. So I think that's really important, so that it's not just, a Chapter 5 inspection program from a manufacturer, but we also have some control over it to put our own items in there.
Fantastic. Jeff, how about in your operation?
As a 10 or more 135, we have a CAS program that kind of drives a lot of that. So being able to gather information from the maintenance tracking program, i.e. using the non-routines, is pretty helpful for us. And then it also makes it easier for me to really kind of narrow down where the problems are and where we can focus on being more efficient.
Thanks. Tim, same to you, sir.
All the things that the guys said there along the way as well. But I wanted to add in the work order, having a really good, strong, robust work order. We want to work with our organization to make sure we have the availability with the airplanes. And so the planning process for me is really important. And so that work order system allows us to forecast a little bit better, put packages together, do better budgeting, and gives us some really good tools to work on manpower and things like that.
So the integration of data-driven maintenance practices enhance safety, obviously, and drives operational efficiency. My next question to the panel is, in what ways does data-driven maintenance offer advantages compared to reactive or scheduled maintenance routines that we've talked about, in Chapter 5? So we will start this time with Jeff. Jeff?
Using the data, it helps pinpoint those areas where we have issues, and we can, I was to say, better forecast where our problems lie and where we can better, again, be more efficient with our time and with our resources.
Great. Tim, over to you.
It's the reoccurring defects, being able to look back and see the historical data that's coming, getting those integration with the things like FOQA, and hopefully someday seeing a really robust, MOQA, if you will. So just having that predictive ability, I'd love to see some more predictive algorithm with like brake wear, tire performance, and even seeing some of that engine trend data kind of working its way into our maintenance tracking, and not have those multiple platforms to go back and forth to look at.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brad?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Tim and Jeff have said. Tracking previous squawks and noticing patterns is really invaluable. I think it helps you, like, for instance, we have a board week coming up where, it's typically very busy. If there's the ability to predict some things, or, we have an issue we've seen in the past, we can maybe be a little bit more proactive, and even, work with an OEM and say, hey, we've, seen this issue in the past. Could you have some parts available where we are? So you just kind of run some interference ahead of time and predict some things.
Yeah, that's a good input. We don't often think of using this to do supply chain management, but if that's a bigger deal, that makes a lot of sense. So now we're going to shift to what are the innovative technologies that enable these data-driven maintenance strategies. But first, we are going to launch another audience poll. So it looks like we're getting everybody's into the data analysis mode, or a lot of us are. So that gives us a clear direction for this. And I'm interested to hear from our panelists what your answer would be for this poll. So we'll start this time with Tim.
The analytics is definitely it for me. Is we don't see enough of what the OEM is able to capture, and I'd love to be able to get some of that data back out to us. I know that they're using it to predict service bulletins and industry and parts and supply and all that to go with it as well. But I'd love to see more of that out available for us, and like the field service reports and things like that. And then also the MROs themselves being able to use some of the data they get with, they do this particular inspection and see these kind of squawks over and over and over again. We don't seem to be able to capture that and see that outside. And I know it's because they're wanting to share or not share that information. So
that is great. Brad?
Yeah, at this point, I would say it's the data analytics as well. You go with the current info you have, right? The future, it seems to be machine learning, AI. I think there's some issues with that yet. There's some things that the industry has to work out. That even though the technology may be coming on board, I think like the logistics on the back end are not necessarily there yet. Like, how is that going to work out with vendors? If I start replacing parts, but there's nothing wrong with them, am I going to get a bill back from the vendor? How is the OEM going to work through all of that? So I think there's some things that they need to work on yet. But I think that probably is the future, that you'll see that, we'll start doing predictive maintenance, anticipatory maintenance, and stop just reacting to it, right? But currently, yeah, I think you go with the data you currently have, and then you make your decisions based on that.
Gotcha. Jeff, how about for you?
I'm going to say analytics as well. I mean, but also I think ease of use of the information. Most of the people that are going to be giving you your data is going to be your mechanics, and you have to have a way for them to make it easy for them to put that information in essence, garbage in, garbage out. We want good data so that data will make an impact, as opposed to just frivolous information that eventually you get lost in the weeds, so to speak. So,
Gotcha. So our next question is, what challenges do you face when integrating data-driven maintenance to your existing operations, and what strategies can you employ to overcome the challenges? So, Brad, let's start with you this time.
Maybe it's a mindset shift. If we're going to start talking about predictive maintenance, I think across the board in the industry, that's going to take a little bit of a shift in how we do things, right? Because we're used to something breaks and we fix it, so we're waiting till something breaks. Now, if we start doing predictive, we're mechanics. That's not in our nature, right? You don't fix what isn't broken. So,
right.
So I think it's going to take a little bit of a shift in thinking, and then kind of what I was alluding to before. So how is the industry going to do this, right? With the data, the predictive data, you have, I think, so Tim mentioned it, that there's engine trends now. So you can, somebody processes those, they can tell you what's going on inside your engine. You can maybe make some decisions based on that, but there's really no airframe equivalent at this point, in my opinion. So I think there needs to be a whole data set built there. We have one manufacturer that we use that's coming out with an aircraft health monitoring system for that whole purpose. They want to build a data set. They want to do predictive stocking of inventory, and then predictive maintenance. And, we as a 3 aircraft operation, we don't have a big enough data set to really do anything with, right? So we need more data. So I think that's going to come from the OEM end, not necessarily from our end, right? So some challenges there, but I think the possibilities are wide open at this point.
It's interesting you mentioned before, in the previous question about machine learning, and you brought up AI, the use of AI, generative or non-generative AI. Obviously, the data that feeds those programs have to be pretty voluminous, and then as a three aircraft operator, it would take a time to build that data set, right, to make that meaningful. Is a sort of randomized AI platform that could do sort of guided troubleshooting or help you in your maintenance planning with machine learning something that you would be that you're comfortable with, or is this something that you're gonna take a wait and see approach for your operation?
I think at this point it's probably wait and see. I really want to see how how it ultimately works out. Because you talk about that data set, it has to be built, but then Tim was alluding to it before that we don't necessarily have access to what the OEMs have access to. So they're the ones collecting all the data, and our aircraft, honestly, even right now, are feeding data to them, right? So they're already building a data set to a certain extent. But yeah, for us, it's like we're not going to go out and invest in an AI program per se, unless it comes with like our tracking software and stuff like that. But I think, once the OEMs start pushing this stuff out more, it's like we're just going to benefit from it ultimately.
That makes perfect sense. Tim, what are your thoughts on this?
I would be very excited to see something coming with machine learning for sure. But it has to have those analytics in the background that it will give suggestions, but it's based on rooted experiences. So I wouldn't want it to be too abstract, if you will. I would want it to definitely be rooted. But also to your question about the challenges that we're facing with this is all these programs is what Brad was talking about, is the programs that we have. We spend a lot of money on using these programs like engine programs and airframes and avionics and all those different things. We've got to do the work now to make sure that those suppliers understand that we're going to use this predictive information so that we aren't stuck somewhere with our airplanes. But also, I think that this information will give them the better ability to RTS these parts and know like real time what was happening with the part and when it failed. And so instead of it being like a 3-word sentence that a technician writes down on what the fault was, they can really use a lot of this background information to support the RTS. So we get a lot less no fault found parts. And then that means for us that, obviously it's better availability of airplanes. And then for these program operators, that's less money that they're spending on these parts, because think of the 4 and 5 times we move a part in and out of a supply chain and it's not repaired the right way. It's kind of rooted in the fact that they just don't have the right information to repair them correctly, or they don't have the right return to service processes because they don't understand the environment. So all of this will help everybody. If we can just help them understand that, yes, it may seem like it's costing more because of a predictive sense of changing a part, but in reality, in the whole picture, it's actually saving money in the organization.
Yeah, that's terrific insight. I mean, the most expensive part of an aircraft that works for a living is being down and not able to do what it's supposed to do, right? So that's fantastic. Jeff, how about in your organization, sir?
Well, we're actually seeing our OEM, Embraer, is working on programs where you're giving them information back. They're using that to help the troubleshooting process. Although they have a really good sim program, they're looking at ways to maximize that with more. They actually give you percentages of where the failures might be, even though it says to follow this sort of sim, and that kind of speeds up the whole downtime because you focus on those areas where the problems seem to be. Again, that's as more and more operators and more MROs are feeding that data back to them, that actually ends up coming back twofold and helps the operator because you know where to go and not waste your time doing some of the troubleshooting that really doesn't help you. It doesn't usually lie in certain areas. It usually lies in the 1 or 2 items that are typically the problem children. So we're using that information. We gather our own as well. But I think that in the future, as more of these OEMs sort of get on board with the fact that, hey, why don't you share that data with us? We'll be able to better plan, and we won't waste your time making those erroneous phone calls constantly saying, hey, I need help with this particular problem, because you'll have a better idea of where you're going with the issues that they're facing. So
that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, and to John, just go back to what Tim said too about the no fault found parts. That's a big issue in the industry, and there's there's nothing worse than getting an 8130 for a tested or inspected part, right? And sometimes it's for the same squawk that you're having. So, as the industry goes through this, it's like, okay, we do predictive maintenance, but technically then every part we send back is going to be no fault found, right? Because it hasn't failed yet. So then, you get to, it's simple things like hydraulic leak rates. Well, what's going to happen with that? I turned it in before it hit its leak rate. Okay, what does that mean at the vendor end, right? So while I think there's a lot of promise, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions yet as to how the industry is going to deal with it.
Interesting. Well, thank you for adding that. All right. So as we move into regulatory compliance and safety culture, obviously, as Part 135, there's a notice for proposed rulemaking out there now that just we started to hear back from this week around safety management systems. So it's fair to say that safety and compliance, regulatory compliance, are top of mind for not just the FAA, but EASA and everywhere else that lives. Before we get into the topic, let's run another poll real quick and hear from the audience. And what we want to know is, what do you find the most challenging when it comes to staying on the right side with compliance and fostering that culture of safety within your flight department? As you're answering that, I think it brings to mind Tim's input about MOQA there, right? We all are familiar with 145, 211, and the quality systems that are in, but it seems that there are more safety programs coming down the pipe. All right, so pretty even split there. Looks like balancing regulations with operational needs is the winner in the clubhouse at this time. What do you find the most challenging when it comes to regulatory compliance and safety culture? Jeff, we'll start with you this time.
I think really is creating a culture where, as a 135, you're driven to make money, and so at times, there's that constant pressure as to when something is actually broken, it's broken, and you got to be able to have the management team that's willing to stand behind you when you tell them, listen, we got to resolve this issue. We cannot let this operate like this. So that culture, if you have that kind of culture, then safety kind of just follows suit. You won't have any issues. Nobody feels like they have to hide anything, so to speak. It's like, it is what it is. We're going to be safe first. We're going to follow the regulations. We'll deal with the consequences financially later. But more importantly, the mindset I've always had as a director of maintenance is, would I put my family on that aircraft? And if I wouldn't, then we're not flying the airplane. So when everyone recognizes that, they kind of follow suit, and we don't usually have any problems. I don't have any pushback, and it makes it so much easier because now you can really focus on doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's a terrific philosophy. Tim, how about for you?
I think it starts in the hiring process. Honestly, it goes that far back for me. I want to make sure that we've got the right people on the team, and that the team is built up of a very mixed group of different opinions and backgrounds and everything else, and they all come together, and we work really, really hard on that front side to make sure that we've got the right people on the team. And I think that the culture will kind of take care of itself from there. And then once you kind of build that right culture, then the open communication happens, and the good dialogue, and the fear factor of not being able to share with your teammates that, hey man, I'm just not feeling great today. I might not be firing on all 8 cylinders. And so you just have that open communication is really important. I know we talk about that quite a bit, but it's a challenge that I think that starts from making sure that we have the right people on the team. And I don't think that I myself included in this, I don't do a good enough job of reaching out to other departments within my own hometown of Charlotte here, right? We don't do a good enough job of finding those other flight departments and openly communicating with them with, what our near misses are, what our challenges are. I mean, what resources do we have on the field that we can help one another with? And so I'd love to see myself doing more of that to try to make sure that it actually pays off so much in the long run for us.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. Brad, how about you?
Just kind of going back to that poll question there, it's balancing operational and safety, you know, the regulations and everything. Sometimes regulations can seem onerous and can feel like they're getting in the way of getting stuff done. And I know they're there for a good purpose, right? So you need to follow them because they are about safety. And I think one thing that goes into that is, you know, on the flight side or pilot side, it kind of seems like safety is sort of built in. Like there's an inherent understanding that what you're doing on a day-to-day basis can be unsafe if you don't do it correctly, right? Because of the conditions that you're working in. Whereas maintenance, you know, we're built to get stuff done, right? It's like if there's a problem, we want to fix it and let's get it done and move on to the next thing and fix the next issue. So safety is not always, I would say, at our forefront, right? Because sometimes it feels like it keeps us from doing stuff. So we have to be proactive about that. One way we go about that is every Monday morning we have a meeting. We talk about the week. We talk about each aircraft. Okay, what do we got to do in each aircraft for the week? How are we going to go about it? What does our schedule look like? How do we have to be there? Or when do we have to be there for arrivals, departures, all that sort of stuff? And then it gets plugged into our safety system. One of our techs enters it in there, puts all the notes, but then also there's a numbering system. So you get a safety number, for lack of a better term. And so as your number goes up, that means, you know, there's more risk involved for that week. So that's accessible to everybody in our department, but it just kind of keeps it in our mind, right? That, hey, we've got a few things this week that maybe we haven't done before or haven't done in a while. And so now our score is higher. So I think that's just it's a good tool, you know. Now that we've got the habit going, it works for us.
Yeah, that's great input. Jeff, do you have a safety huddle or some time spent with your crew that is specifically set for that discussion, or is it part just more interwoven within the culture of everything, you know, the maintenance that you are doing?
We periodic meetings. We go over things, but we have a turnover. We run basically two shifts, so our morning shift and our afternoon shift will overlap middle of the day, and that's when most of the guys are here. So that's when we do. We talk about issues. We talk about where we faltered, what we could do better, things associated with troubleshooting. What course of action do we take on a particular problem, and what can we do better next time, so on and so forth. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great time to do it. Turnover is always nice to have everybody on hand. Tim, how about for your crew?
We do. We, like Brad, we do ours every morning, and just look at the day and then what we got going for the next day. But one of the lines in that meeting is just a real short safety, and that line is there to get us to think about the things that we're doing that day, and if there's anything to add an extra precaution to. How's everybody doing? We also talk in that section like a challenging point. Where did we see a process that was going on the day before that maybe we thought should have gone differently? How can we implement some kind of new process to prevent that from coming on again? And then what is it that what are the main factors that are contributing against us in the day, so that we can address those right first thing in the morning and then think about them as we're going through the day?
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm always interested to hear what flight departments and maintenance departments both do along the safety huddle concept. So I really appreciate you guys sharing that with us.
Going back to what Jeff said too about the follow-up. So, you know, it's not just about the front end, it's about the back end as well, right? So like our crews will debrief after flights and stuff like that. And, you know, we start to do it a little bit more after maintenance events to debrief it and be like, okay, what did we do well? What did we not do well? And even from a safety perspective, it's like, okay, the way we went about this, was it the right way to do it? Especially when you talk about MEL issues and things like that. But the other thing too is we have a very proactive safety culture here. We have a safety captain. But, you know, we're constantly emphasizing the non-punitive nature of bringing up safety concerns. So anybody is free to write up a safety incident, whether the issue actually happened or whether you're trying to keep it from happening, right? But anybody can write it up, and it's not about getting somebody in trouble. It's about, let's make it a safe environment. Okay, maybe we screwed up on something. No harm, no foul. Let's do it different going forward, right? But so that everybody knows that, hey, we're not trying to get you in trouble. Your job's not at risk here, all that sort of stuff. So you need to get that culture built.
Yeah, that's fantastic input. How do you tie your findings back into sort of the proactive side of the house? Like beyond the follow-up, how do you work that into what you do going forward?
I think for us, there have been times where we have talked about things and all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, let's maybe write up a non-routine item, or let's put a maintenance task in to address this, right? Something catches us. I don't know. We didn't change our tires soon enough, and all of a sudden we got cord showing. Okay, well, let's put a card in there to check them at an interval that is before, what we've seen in the past. So it does actually help us to write up a few things that we maybe wouldn't.
It's a great example. I appreciate that. Thanks for expanding. All right, so we're going to have the speed round here, and just for sake of expediency, we'll go Tim, Brad, Jeff. So Jeff, you get the luxury of just saying me too on some of these things, but it's a real short answer format is what it is. So Tim, in your experience, what's shown more success, data-driven maintenance or reactive maintenance?
Definitely data-driven maintenance.
Brad?
Yeah, I'd say data-driven as well.
Jeff?
Data.
Across the board. Very good. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Which is more critical, optimizing operational efficiency or going to the highest level of safety standards? Now, given that aviation, safety is a moral imperative, right? That's sort of a non-starter. So we'll take that off the table. But which do you balance for? I mean, because it is a balance. Operational efficiency, or is everything at the beck and call of maximizing safety procedures? Tim?
We start from a safety mindset for sure and everything that we're doing, but I would hate to paint it into a corner and say that we go to the highest degree of safety, because it's inherent in walking out of your house in the morning. So we do have some operational goals that kind of we weigh against the safety factor.
Brad?
Yeah, same. I mean, you always default to the safety, right? You don't compromise on that, but there is a reasonable balance where, you can't just cut something off just because it's there's a potential for being unsafe per se. But yeah, you got to find that right balance there. But definitely you go to the safety side before the operational side.
Jeff?
Yeah, definitely safety. I use an example. If you have a technician working on the job and you're constantly asking them, are you done? Are you done? Are you done? That's going to create a problem. So I always tell the guys, listen, if it takes you longer than normal, but you're doing it right and you're doing it safe, I'm not gonna lose my mind over it. So yeah, you try to be as efficient as you can, but I want to make sure that they understand safety is paramount.
Very good. I appreciate that. So as you know, and as Tim mentioned too, you're doing risk mitigation at some point, right? When you walk out your front door, you don't have zero chance of anything happening to you. So, but when you are mitigating these risks, you prioritize addressing known risks or preparing for sort of unforeseen events, like balancing against an unforeseen maintenance event. Tim, we'll start with you.
I think that we try to bake into our policies the known risks. So we start from that rooted structure, and then moving forward from that, we do really good briefs before the crews brief before they leave. They talk about all the unknown factors that we might have at this airport or that port. We do the same thing when we go to do a maintenance task that we've not done before. We want to group in and make sure everybody's aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what are the potential risks that we may have, and keep an eye out for.
Great, Brad.
Definitely the same. You kind of build those known risks from experience into your operation, right? And then as you get familiar, even with a specific airframe or whatever, you get better at kind of knowing what your unforeseen stuff is. And then that goes operationally as well. Our flight crews are very good at as Tim was saying, you brief all that stuff. So they do a lot of anticipatory stuff. So again, it's a mix, it's a balance, but yeah, I think we probably are on the known issues side first.
Yeah.
No, I would agree. Known side first, and then obviously, you look at the items that could come up. You try to plan for those. You talk about them, especially before a big maintenance event, before engine runs or a task that you've never done before. You get the team together. The more people that are involved, the more people understand it, and then the next time it becomes commonplace. So that's kind of the way we look at it.
Got it. So as we're in this sort of state of transition in aviation maintenance from whiteboards that were in hangars forever and ever, amen, to something a little more into the modern approach for doing things, do you lean toward when you're creating your strategy, are you leaning on sort of not more of the scheduled inspections, or are you looking deeper into sort of the data that you do have around your own fleets to schedule and create that maintenance plan? We'll start with Jeff this go around.
We look at a lot of the scheduled maintenance, but we've seen non-routines that have created the need to do things early, and so we will plan accordingly. We also know, based on our high season and low season for us, being here in Southwest Florida, we've got a busy time, we've got a slower time, and so we will sometimes adjust our maintenance requirements and our needs based on how busy we're going to be at a certain time. So we try to take and utilize the slow times to work our maintenance as much as we can, because we know in the busy season the aircraft need to fly as much as they can.
Brad, how about you?
Yeah, definitely echo that. I think your long-term planning, you're looking at scheduled, obviously, right? And what Jeff was saying, it's if you can legitimately knock out maintenance before your busy season, so you don't have to put your aircraft down, that's invaluable, right? You can keep those aircraft flying. So I think there's definitely that. And then, in the short term, it's like, if you're seeing some patterns, I don't know how Jeff does it across 10 aircraft. It's like I have 2 Falcons, and a lot of times I can't remember which aircraft had which issue, right? And so you go back to your non-routines, you're like, oh, it was this Falcon that had that issue. So, when you get a big fleet, I can imagine that is paramount to have that kind of tracking.
Tim, how about you?
Definitely historical data. I do most of our stuff off of the scheduled maintenance side of things, and then we do go back and review all the non-routines that are going on during the month and repeat that. And then, just like Jeff was saying, if we see things that are reoccurring for us and it's not driven by some inspection criteria or something like that, we definitely add those tasks ourselves. As good operators, the best practice is to definitely use that history and information that we've got. So
fantastic. All right, so we've got some time for a little Q&A. We have one so far that says, how do you implement data-driven maintenance on a day-to-day basis? So more in the tactical realm as far as instead of the long term. Well, Tim, we'll go back to you.
I think we use things like non-routines that have let's say, for instance, if you had a CAS message that came up and it was cleared. And we definitely want to note that stuff. We don't have a current fault, but we want to make sure that that stuff is captured in the system, because Lord knows 2 weeks from now, we're not going to remember all the particulars of that particular event. So we want to make sure we captures every single one of those things. And we tell our crews quite oftenly that, if it's not in our tracking system, it didn't happen. So we can't help you. We can't figure out what's going on with the airplanes if you don't record this information for us. And so we work really, really hard with them to make sure that all that stuff is captured.
Jeff?
Yeah, that's pretty common. Trying to train your crews to get that information in there, so it is useful. Pilots are typically don't like to write things up, and so we, as a DOM, I push them a little. Others would say, well, that just downs aircraft, but if you can't troubleshoot it, you can't. Even if you can't duplicate it, at least now you've got a history of something that happened. This is what we're going to do, and this is what we've done in the past. Again, the non-routine's pretty valuable for us. One of the nice features I like about Veryon is that non-routine system. I pull data from that. I run graphs. It's very helpful. So on a day-to-day basis, the guys all have access to it. We train all our technicians to look at that stuff. Not only just look at the scheduled maintenance that's coming up, but also look at some non-routines that have happened on that aircraft in the last month or the last 2 months. I mean, do we see trends? Do we see other aircraft? We have the luxury of, 4 of our aircraft in our fleet are the same identical aircraft. So we see trends across all of those. It's really hard when you have a fleet, and I've worked in as a DOM of a fleet of aircraft that were everything from beach jets to Gulfstreams, and you may have 1 or 2 of each one, and it becomes really hard to gather data that's relatable across the fleet. So when you have that information, it's really getting your team to utilize that information and be part of that whole process. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. So here's another question. Can you share an example of successful integration of predictive maintenance into your existing maintenance program? So whatever you're using to do your maintenance tracking to begin with. Tim?
I think one of the ones that we did was, this is a while ago, that like oil, like following whether or not your engines are using too much oil. We use that in our checklist process. We document how much we're adding every single time the airplane comes home, and so we used that to trend whether or not that engine was using too much oil or not, and it helped us with the crews in that communication, making sure they understand whether it was or wasn't too much. I think that's the one that kind of comes to mind first off.
Sure. Brad, do you have an example?
I don't think we have anything like hard and fast predictive like they're talking about nowadays, but I mentioned a little bit before, we had an issue with tires where we had a number in our head or how many landings we could get out of them that we were kind of hitting pretty good. And then all of a sudden a plane came back and it was showing cord on the outside of the tire on the hump or the shoulder of it. And it was before we had anticipated. So after that, we entered some data to, at a certain number of landings, we check the tires regardless, right? And then if they need it, we change them right there. Or, in the past, if we have a busy season coming up and it's like, well, these tires aren't all that bad, but we're not going to have a window when we get into our busy season. So I need to change them a little bit early, even though it costs a little bit more and all that, but it's like, you have one AOG event and you've made up for that cost in a heartbeat, right? So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jeff, anything from you on this?
Brad stole mine. We had a problem with tires. I implemented a code that just says, hey, at a certain number of cycles, we take a look at the tires. I mean, on a continuous basis. A lot of times what you'll find is if an aircraft's on the road, you don't really get a chance to see it all the time. So if that number's there and I see it get close, and I'm like, all right, as soon as that aircraft comes back, somebody needs to take a good look at those tires. We've also had cases where we had a particular component. It was a Mercy light battery system on the Embraers that just, the darn thing, when it fails, and turns the lights on. It keeps them on. There's no MEL relief for it. You got to change it on the road. It's a pain. So what we implemented is, I took what the current tracking was, and I kind of added another one to say, hey, take a look at it at this point a little sooner. Maybe we can catch them before they fail on us on the road. So things like that.
Very good. Okay, so we've got several in the Q&A file. We'll just hit a couple more before we're out of time. This question's from Brett. What is the best and quickest way to encourage change to a maintenance tracking system operator, i.e. changes to the software? Brad, you want to start? What's your best way to encourage that change?
I'm assuming they mean changing vendors or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, I guess you got to look at the features overall, right? And see, is this really for what we're paying? Is it providing the value that we need? And first and foremost, is it doing what you need it to do? And if you can show that, well, this is kind of falling short, or it's doing what you need to do, but we can find just as good a software over here at a cheaper price, and they have the same kind of support and all that. I think you can make the case for it, right? At that point.
Tim, what about you?
If I got questioned like that, I would want to make sure that we're doing an apples to apples comparison. I want to make sure that just because it has the same features like a checklist or a do list or things like that, I would want to make sure that the ease of use, operation, the communication, the support in the background, all those things that Brad was talking about, it's like I would just want to make sure that we're really taking a deep look, because the reality is moving between platforms it's a lot of work. It's just a lot of work, and we shouldn't take that on in a free kind of way, and to be honest, the data corruption that happens moving between platforms is very, very critical. It happens a lot, and you have to double check quite a bit. So I would just want to make sure we're doing a good apples to apples comparison.
Great advice. Jeff, how about you, sir?
I have to agree with both Brad and Tim. I mean, changing from one program to another it's a pain. And so you really do have to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. I think all the companies out there, or the reputable companies, all do a pretty good job regulatory wise. It's just a matter of making sure that it does what you need it to do, as long as it meets all those regulatory issues. Is it easier to use? Is it easier for your techs to use? I mean, some of that is all the factors in it. And otherwise, you could put yourself into a situation where you have some issues and loss of data over time if you switch from one program to another.
Gotcha. Okay, so lots of good questions and lots of good feedback. We'll go with this last one here because it kind of wraps everything up. This question is from Matthew. He said, scheduled maintenance inspections seem to be taking longer than in the past. What is your strategy to reduce downtime for scheduled inspections? Jeff, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, I'll be honest with you. We do a lot of our own maintenance, our own scheduled maintenance. When you go into an MRO, you are at their mercy, so to speak. Depending on what you bring into them and how big they are and what their workload's like. In years past, it used to be that you would take an aircraft into an MRO and they would have, a large crew of guys that would work it, or gals. And we're not seeing that anymore. I mean, the industry is seeing a shortage of mechanics across the board. So if you can have the right talent and you can do a lot of your own work, I think you can control a lot of your own costs and your own downtime. That's one of the ways that we do it. We also plan ahead a little bit, understanding what those scheduled items are and how they can kind of work together. Sometimes you got to really plan when you're going to do a certain area, and see if there's any other inspections that are in that certain area, so that you're not taking something apart twice, and maximize and be as efficient as you can, so that the aircraft stays up more, and your guys aren't burning out.
Very good. Brad?
I think Tim mentioned it before, but the work order system, when we go in, we even have the MROs, they quote off of our work order that we build, because I really want ownership of that, so that we know what we're doing when we're going in, so that they don't have to put a whole package for us and together and we don't know what's going on. The other part is I'll order, if I know there's certain parts I'm going to need, I'll queue those up ahead of time, right? Because of supply chain issues and all that. And some service bulletins, you have to get on with the OEM before you even go in. So it's as much as you can front load all that stuff to begin with, that's going to help your delivery date, right?
Terrific. Yep. Tim?
I completely agree with these guys, and we're actually in the process of restructuring our team to try to address some of this, because we need to pull a lot more of this in-house. The inspection programs are written so that we can really spread this load over a bigger time, and we can take on some of that ourselves. And then that there's nothing can be said more about planning and organizing and preparing for these events to make sure that we have everything thought out along the way. We just took on the new work order system, and being able to identify what we can do prior, what we're going to do what we need engine runs for, addressing and tagging these things different ways to make sure that we're all on the same page of how we're going to lay out this inspection. And we also need to be going a whole nother year ahead. I want to see us a lot more not reactive to the fact that we know we're going in for a visit in September and we start looking at the package in June. We should be already done with the next year in the previous year, thinking through what we're going to do.
That makes a lot of sense, and it obviously shows all of your experience in making this happen. So before we go, we're going to ask one final poll question here. Please let us know if you'd like to learn more about Veryon tracking as an all-in-one maintenance tracking platform. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their insights, experience, and letting us benefit from their experience. It's been a terrific conversation, and thank everyone in the audience for being active participants. And I hope you found this very valuable to get all this insight from these industry pros. So back over to our host.
I'd like to thank you all for joining today, and thank you once again to our Veryon team.